There's no one left who remembers what it was like when humanity joined our ranks. There are videos, reports, textbooks, all filled with the same smiling photographs and ceremonial speeches. But there is no one left who was there. No one who shook their hands on that first day. No one who heard their voices with their own ears. And so, we forgot. We watched as humanity grew old and peaceful. We saw them settle into a comfortable place of power and influence among the great races of the Union. We saw them speak softly in councils, offer wisdom in disputes, share technology, and send ambassadors to worlds we hadn't visited in centuries. And slowly, silently, we began to resent them. What had they done to deserve their status? What had they done to earn their place? How had this upstart race, barely a few millennia in space, become so widespread in our galaxy? We were the ones who built this community. We were the ones who forged the Union. Our people had been here long before them. We lived longer. Learned more. We deserved more. And so, we struck first. We prepared in secret. We gathered our fleets. We whispered to old allies, calling in favors, sharing promises of power and territory. And then, we attacked. We struck the settlements and colonies bordering our territories, burning this human infestation from our planets. And gods, how we reveled in the fear. How we bathed in the destruction. How we laughed as human voices cried out in panic over open channels. We flew back to our homeworlds victorious, eager, hungry for their reply. We anticipated outrage. We expected a declaration of war. We needed their fleets to meet ours so we could have a proper conflict. A proper beating. And so, we waited. If attacking them was our greatest error, then waiting for their response was the second worst thing we could have done. Because they didn't reply. They didn't send messages. They didn't negotiate. They, simply, acted. Within a week, countless war vessels hovered over our worlds. Some of them were older models, designs we had seen only in textbooks, relics from centuries past. But most were new. And they were armed to the teeth. We saw energy signatures we didn't recognize, readings so alien to us, we couldn't even analyze them. But instead of firing, they sat there. Silent. Every gun, every cannon, aimed directly at our skies. It was strange, the older ships were in the front, almost like a shield. Antiques, placed between us and the newer ones. They ignored our attempts at contact. They ignored our threats. And any vessel that drifted too close, had every single human weapon lock onto it in an instant. We couldn't move. We couldn't fight. And so, we felt shame. Not because we thought we were wrong. No. Because we had underestimated them. We told ourselves that these older ships meant humanity was stretched thin. That they had pulled these relics from museums because they didn't have enough real firepower left. That if they truly wanted war, they would have opened fire already. We were certain that in a drawn-out conflict, we could outlast them. But there was something unsettling about those old ships. Something about their design. The curves. The edges. They felt familiar. Like copies of something we'd once known, but just different enough to keep us from placing it. And the longer we stared, the more the unease grew. It was an itch in our minds that refused to fade. A shadow in the corner of our memories. So, we began to search. We scoured archives. We read every old record we could find. We rewatched the ancient footage. And then, we found it. Not the ships. The Selaxians. They had been gone for centuries. A race spoken of only in hushed tones, if at all. And yet, here we were, staring at their ghosts in human steel. The Selaxians. They were not a name spoken often in our time. Not because their story was unimportant, but because it was dangerous. The Union called them the Lost Civilization. Long ago, in the early days of the Union, the Salaxians stood beside us. They were bold, cunning, and, above all else, born for war. When a conquest began, they led the charge. When a rebellion rose, they crushed it first. Their fleets were swift and merciless. And in those years, the Union wasn't the gentle, nurturing community it pretends to be today. Back then, we were conquerors. And none among us reveled in conquest more than the Salaxians. But one day, the Salaxians made a mistake. They attacked a world they thought would fall easily. It didn't. The enemy they met that day would not relent. They did not tire. They did not surrender. And for reasons we still do not fully understand, the Salaxians resorted to methods so unseemly, so horrifying, that even we, the warlike Union of old, shuddered. The price they paid was beyond imagining. That enemy, their enemy, hunted them without mercy. They burned their colonies. They hunted their ships. They scattered their fleets. And when the Salaxians thought they had escaped, their hunters followed. Finally, their homeworld fell. Not to siege. Not to bombardment. But to destruction so total, the very planet cracked apart. As we stared at the human ships floating over our worlds, we realized where we had seen those curves before. That armored hull. That prow like a blade. They were copies of Salaxian designs. Crude in some places, altered in others, but unmistakable now that the memory had returned. And with that recognition, came fear. Because if the ships were Salaxian copies, then there was only one possible answer. We knew who had destroyed them. When humanity first reached beyond their home system, they were nothing remarkable. A young race. Primitive technology. No great fleets. No great power. But when they met the Salaxians, they found something else. They found hate. Hate so deep, it consumed them. They had no technology to match the Salaxians, so they stole it. They had no fleets to rival them, so they built them, fast, dirty, imperfect. Hundreds of ships, each one barely more than a weapon with engines strapped to it. They cobbled together copies of Salaxian warships and sent them out by the hundreds, overwhelming quality with sheer, savage quantity. The Salaxians fought back. They had centuries of war behind them. They had the finest fleets in the Union. And for a time, they even won. But humanity would not stop. Every battle they lost only seemed to make them fight harder. Every defeat brought more ships. More weapons. More death. When the Salaxians finally retreated to their homeworld, humanity came for it. They hurled captured and wrecked Salaxian ships at the planet like meteors. They pounded it until it could bear no more, and it cracked apart beneath the assault. But humanity wasn't finished. With star charts taken from prisoners, they hunted the survivors. Every last settlement they could find was burned. Every last fleet they could chase was destroyed. And when there was no one left to find, they stopped. The Salaxians were gone. Their name, erased. Their worlds, dust. Our predecessors had watched it all. Some had wanted to help the Salaxians. The Salaxians themselves begged us not to interfere, because they feared it would only make things worse. And so we did nothing, except watch. We watched the most war-hungry species we had ever known. Beg the rest of the galaxy not to fight their enemy. We saw the conquerors of conquerors die screaming under human fire. When it was over, and humanity made first contact with the Union, their hands were drenched in the blood of an entire civilization. And still, we shook them. We welcomed them. Not out of trust, but out of fear. And then, something strange happened. They put down their weapons. They picked up the tools of peace. They wrote treaties. They built alliances. They spoke softly. And the galaxy let itself forget. But now, we remembered. We remembered what they did to the Salaxians. We remembered the hate. We remembered the hammer they had once swung. And we looked up, at the old ships they'd placed between us and them. And wondered if they were a reminder. Or, a warning. We waited. Every second felt like an hour. The human fleet remained, still. Not a shot fired. Not a single word spoken. We watched from our war rooms, our cities, our homes. Every news feed showed the same image, the old warships drifting above our worlds like ancient predators, waiting to strike. We prepared for the first blast. Some prayed. Some armed themselves. Some simply stared into the sky. And yet, nothing happened. One day passed. Then another. Then a week. Then, the humans spoke. One transmission. Short. Calm. Almost polite. We acknowledge your transgression. We will not retaliate. We will accept reparations in resources and materials. There will be no war, unless you choose it. We didn't know how to respond. Some thought it was a trap. Some believed they had forgiven us. Others whispered the most terrifying theory of all. That they didn't care enough to destroy us. To the Union, war was everything: pride, honor, vengeance. But to humanity, war was a thing to be used, and then put away. Still, we paid. Massive shipments of refined metals. Fuel. Food. Medical supplies. Anything they asked for, we sent. Not because the price was high, but because the alternative was unthinkable. And then, one by one, the human ships began to turn. No sudden jumps to faster than light. No rapid retreat. They left, slowly. Deliberately. As if to make sure we saw every single ship depart. It took days for the last of them to leave our skies. And when they were gone, the galaxy let out a breath it didn't know it was holding. In the Union capital, leaders gathered. Speeches were made. Records were restored. The Salaxians were spoken of openly again, as a warning, not a memory. And we swore, we would never provoke the old man again. Never forget the hammer that had once fallen. Never test the mercy we had been given. But in the shadows, some of us wondered. Why had they spared us? Was it truly mercy? Or had they judged us, not worth the effort? And which fate was worse? Lest the old man pick up his hammer, once again. The Salaxians are gone. The Union remembers. Humanity waits.